So again, I'm just going to talk real briefly, the first slide, which you already had. There's no notes, why identifying your worldview matters, and then I will reiterate those first two effects and finish the last few. And we'll say, and I'm going to state why it's important that I'm doing that as I move through them. So again, I was trying to show the dichotomy between sacred and secular, and how the world that we live in, it affects the way that we're going to view the material that you're going to learn. And we don't think that. You know, there's so many things in our world that we just assume this is how it's always been. I'll give you two very clear examples. Childhood. That, as a concept, is relatively new. I don't know how really old it is. They say Dickens kind of, really sprung it. We're only talking like 100 and some years old. Now, you might be thinking, well, there's always been kids. Well, of course there's always been kids. But a concept of childhood, that's a different story. And if you're not quite picking up on that, or that seems like it's not entirely true, go north of Kutztown or south of Lancaster and hang around the Amish. These kids, as soon as they're viable bodies, they're out. They're sitting on the back of the plant, the carts planting food. As soon as they can carry something, they are. And they go to school to 8th grade because that's really only the basic knowledge they need to know to be productive in their little communities. All right? That was the world. As soon as you were old enough to do anything, you were doing it. Now, in the Western world, childhood can extend into your 20s. Okay? That's a new concept. Same thing with retirement. Everybody wants to put money away so that when you hit 65 or whatever it is, you can retire. That's a pretty new concept, too. 100 and some years ago, that was only for the aristocracy. Everybody else worked until you died, or you worked until you couldn't, and somebody just took care of you, right? That type of thing. So here's my point. Those things aren't particularly, relative to what we're talking about. They're just an explanation as to how things aren't always as they are. So Finding Nemo. I only saw parts of the movie, but what was it? The one fish was in that aquarium, and they plugged the filter so that it can get cloudy, right? And then that way they would clean it. We do not realize how cloudy or clear the water that we live in, which is our culture, because we just assume this is how it's been. Unless you are a very reflective person or you take a course on culture, you don't realize that we are living in a particular time, and this time affects how we are going to look at the material that I give you. So if we live in a culture that's highly secular, you're going to look at all these things about rituals and such much different than they would have a couple hundred years ago. So you have to just keep that in mind. We might feel very scientific today, so, and I'll talk about that. So we view everything in terms of that. That could be an issue, all right? So I just need you just to understand that as moving through this. That's really the whole point there, nothing beyond that. So just to reiterate, there is nothing you can separate from your worldview. It's going to affect how you understand the human person. It's going to affect how you view morality. I already talked about this somewhat. It's going to talk about what your understanding of love is. Not that you can't love, but your understanding of love. All right? It's going to influence your politics, and it's absolutely going to. Art is just one of those things that really, it kind of brings out how we view the world. Do we look at the world in utilitarian means? Do we look at the world where it has to, we need to be shocked and awed? Or is it an expression of something that's transcendent? Does art have something to say that's beyond us? So we can't get away from this. So all I'm trying to do is bring up for you that be aware that, everything that I'm going to be teaching you here, you're coming in with your own perspectives. And that perspective becomes the filter by which you see this. So you're going to have to take that into account. So if what I'm saying may not ring true for you, just think back to yourself that perhaps it's the way that I see the world. Sure, go ahead. Yeah, that'd be fine. All right, so I think we did the first two elements with you. So let me just reiterate them for the sake of me recording this now. And do not think that I am trying to make some overarching, comment or point here. I am just trying to say these are elements that are within our culture, and you have to be aware of them. We live in a very individualistic culture. Now, on some regards, we like that because it makes us a little bit more rugged, a little more self-sustaining, a little bit more that I don't rely on you to take care of me. So there's aspects of that that can be beneficial, But we have to always remember that it also can make us think that there's nothing else that's important, right? So the emphasis on personal goals, and how else did I say that? Yeah, it's just that we have a priority of our own interest. We have to be careful that we don't look at everything through how does it affect us. In other words, if we did have that position, then all traditions and rituals would just appear as something primitive. It'd be like us looking at some cultural anthropologist explanation of some South American tribe from the 1700s, and we think, well, that's interesting, but how quaint. So we don't look past that. Pleasure and pain then become the way that we determine our activities, right? And again, I get that. Somebody might say, who goes after pain? What are we, masochists? Well, it's going to be your understanding of the human person. Do you think the human person is a sacrificial being? Do you think it's important for us to be relational? Do you think it's part of our nature? It's going to change how we see the world, all right? And our ethics would be utilitarian. So we will look at things in what do they produce? What is the effect? What is the benefit to me? We're not going to look, is it the right thing to do? In other words, from a Christian standpoint, if every Christian had a utilitarian attitude, we would never have a martyr. Nobody would ever have died for anything that was a belief they thought worth laying their life down for. We would never have great people like Martin Luther King Jr. What reason would he have to put himself into harm's way? Why couldn't he just go live his life and just be with his family? That would be perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with being with your family, living your life. He saw something greater than that, and he was willing to sacrifice. He did not look at the world in terms of the end justifies the means, nor only things that bring him pleasure. Okay. The second one was bureaucracy, and this may have been a little vague for you. It adds organization, and that's absolutely true. But it also adds a lot of needless complexities, right? There's a lot of things that get built in. Just think in terms of paperwork. You get flooded with that stuff when you first come in. Now, to a certain degree, we need this because we need to organize our society and our systems. But on the other hand, it can really dehumanize us. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. First of all, it just becomes inefficient. It never is the best way. In other words, Mr. Ballister is the principal in this school. And I am an employee of Mr. Ballister. So yes, I need to follow the guidelines and the wishes that he has for how this school and culture are run. But Mr. Ballister will be the first person to admit that he doesn't know exactly how this particular class should be orchestrated and run. He's got to defer to me in that regard. If he tried to set everything from the top and I simply had to follow, things would not go well. They would not be efficient. Now you're going to learn what that means in morality next semester. There's a word for it. You don't need to know now. It's called subsidiarity. But nonetheless, it can become very inefficient. Just go to the DMV. You know how that works, right? And also, there are arising many dehumanizing aspects. I'll give you one as far as dehumanizing. If anybody goes into economics or in business, you'll start using terms like workforce. That's pretty bad. There's no workforce. These are people, all right? When you start talking about workforce, just the term itself starts throwing you in a dehumanizing area. And what does that mean? That means you become dispensable. So let me tell you about my two brother-in-laws who are extremely nice guys. They do manual work. Both of them have told me they don't know why monkeys don't do their jobs. In other words, my one brother-in-law sits on the end of a machine, and he made carpet for like Ford cars. And he says the carpet comes down, he slides underneath whatever the binding thing does. It goes ba-boom, ba-boom. He turns it 90 degrees, ba-boom, ba-boom, and then shoves it down the assembly line. That's his job. My other brother-in-law, at least he did, would be at the end of an assembly line for Donnelly Printing. So his job literally was to take the books as they come off, put them into boxes, stack the boxes. When the skid was full, the skid loader would come in and pull the skid away. Okay. What happens? As we become specialized and everything becomes efficient and mechanized, we lose some sort of identity as to how am I contributing to that. So we will look for any little thing that brings us identity, like that's mine, I did that. It could be dehumanizing. Now that may sound vague to you, but in the world, if you guys are going into business, you become managers, you got to keep that in mind. Work is dignified for people, and they want to see, how am I involved in this? Why am I worth? Am I expendable? Can I literally just be replaced by somebody else? There's no importance to who I am. So here's a really easy example that makes it brings it home. My neighbor a year or so ago was putting an addition on his house, and he had a steel beam to span the basement, and it was laying in the front yard. And we had a community days going on, so the fireworks, and everybody was coming home, leaving the fireworks, going back to the cars to go home. And this guy, probably in his mid-late 20s, was walking by with, I'm presuming, his wife, and he saw the steel beam. And he stopped his wife and goes, look, that's me. I did that. I'm the one who pulled that off and inspected it, because his initials and everything were on it. And I sat there thinking what pride this guy was taking in it. You know, why do we do that? Because we want to see significance in our work. And in a dehumanizing, bureaucratic world, it's very easy for that to go away. We don't see our part in the larger picture. Okay? So I'm not trying to make some overarching point. I'm just saying keep that in mind. Okay? Another one is pluralism. This one's a little tricky, because the reality is that we live in a world where there's a lot of different ethnicities, races, opinions, religions, and you name it. Okay? So there are many different value systems in the world. The problem comes is when we all think they are equally true. Okay? Now, I am not talking about race or ethnicity, because there's no distinctions in the dignity of the people between that. But we all have various political opinions. We all have various religious opinions. And they are not all true. Now, you might already be thinking that this is going to sound like I'm going to be a little essentialist, saying that the Catholics are better than everybody else. Let me explain. Let me bring up, that might come up in one of the effects. Yeah. What happens is that if you think that they are all equally true and should be tolerated, we start to look for the lowest common denominator to get along. And we think any disagreement becomes disrespect. You're going to struggle with that in this course. That if I'm giving you something I disagree with you, or I disagree with your particular faith or non-faith expression, that's a disrespect. So let me make something point really clear on this, so you get it, right? If somebody said to me, Mr. Bueno, do you think the Catholic Church is the true church and the best expression of the Christian faith? Yes, without a doubt. Now, if you question that, not because I'm a religious teacher, why would I be Catholic if I didn't think that? I mean, if you're a Christian and you think, well, I don't see any difference between them all, we all believe in the same God. You know who you just threw under the bus? Martin Luther. This man nailed theses on the door, broke with the Catholic Church over very specific things, and you have just in one sentence said everything he did was meaningless. There's no other way about that. I mean, if I want you to think about that. And if you're a Reformed religious Christian, if you go to, say, the Presbyterians, some Lutherans, or anybody who follows Reformed faith, same thing with John Calvin. If you were Mennonite, like I used to go to meetings every month with 15, 13 Protestant ministers. About 3 or 4 of them were Mennonite ministers. If I went to the Mennonite minister and I said, do you think the Mennonite is the clearest expression of the Christian faith? Why would I expect him to say anything other than yes? What would I expect him to say? Well, no, really, I think the Methodists have it right. But I'm a Mennonite. Okay? So at some point, it's not disrespectful to talk about differences. All right? And it's not disrespectful to point out those differences. We have to watch that. That could be a problem because it sounds nice on the surface that we all do need to get along, right? There's no doubt of that. But when we start equating and calling everything equal, I mean, we don't realize that some people have put their lives on the line and probably have died for the sake of pointing out what they thought was an error. Let's just keep that in mind as we go. By the way, you don't need to remember this, but Archbishop Chaput from Philadelphia pointed out very clearly, toleration might be necessary in a pluralistic society because you have to get along. It's not a Christian virtue. Next semester, I'll teach you the etymology and the definition of tolerate. You know, toleration really has to do with enduring an evil. You know, so when you're tolerating somebody, you're in essence saying there's something you disagree with. We forget about that. Which brings me to the next point. Respect and toleration inevitably become equated with acceptance. In other words, if I tolerate you, I should accept you. No. If somebody in my family is having an extramarital affair, I would have to tolerate that. What am I going to do? There's no civil law against it. You can't have them arrested. I can go and say you need to stop. What exactly am I going to do? I can't every single time I see them say, are you still, having but I don't have to accept it. I can tell them what you are doing is wrong. By the way, you cannot make a judgment. A judgment determines this and not that. Every time you make a judgment, you have already determined this and not that. Tolerance is, if we understand it in the wrong way, is going to say they're both fine. And that's impossible, right? It's impossible. So it has nothing about being kind or respectful. Let's just make sure we don't understand that it's a little bit different than accepting. This one is very important, all right? There's just, I think, maybe one more after this. If you are a materialist, you will have to basically hold to the position that all that exists is material, which can be measured and weighed. And that's it. If you can't measure and weigh it, it does not exist. There's a lot of issues with this, all right? And there's a lot of confusion about this. This would be the, first of all, this does not necessarily have to be the atheist position. There are atheists who believe in the immateriality of things in the world, all right? If you are an atheist who believes only in the material world, there are certain, now I know you might disagree with me, but I'm also going to say you probably haven't thought about it too much. You do not believe in free will. You cannot believe in free will, all right? It gets very difficult. You're also going to have little issues with love, because love and friendship, what we would call the great ideas, may not entirely be a choice, and it also just might be fluctuations in your hormones and genetics. You have to accept that, all right? This does not mean, I'm not saying they don't love, you get it. I'm just saying that if you hold to a materialist point of view, it comes with certain conditions. And you might be sitting here thinking, well, I disagree with you, but I'm going to just throw it out there and say you haven't quite studied it enough. It gets very difficult to maintain free will in an atheist materialist position. All right? But here are some other effects. It creates an ideology of scientism, not science, scientism. All right? Scientism claims the only things that are true are things you can empirically prove. That's it. If you can't empirically prove it, then it's not true. Part of this comes, and I'm hoping somebody in the earlier grades really drilled this home with you, this concept that there's a division between Christianity and science. Somehow the Catholic Church is anti-science, and everybody starts throwing in Galileo. They don't know anything about that, but they just throw it in there because they say, well, the church didn't like Galileo because he said that the earth was no longer the center of the universe. Study history, Copernicus did that before him. Copernicus was a Catholic prelate. Not only that, but many of the founders of science were Catholic prelates. Genetics, pretty important field today. Gregor Mendel, Big Bang Theory, Gere, nonetheless, all right? But scientism claims the only things that you can prove are can be empirically verified. You no longer can really say that I can't say my wife loves me. I can only say she loves me because there's effects that I see. She does things for me. This is why people will say, and I've had friends, I'm not saying educated, well-learned friends, and I have many friends that are well-learned and atheists would never say this to me, but the ones that are not so learned will say, well, I don't believe in God because you can't prove he exists. What do you mean by proof? Well, you're here, I can see you. Okay. All of a sudden we're starting to talk empirical, right? And I'm not interested. I can go up and down all of Thomas Aquinas' Qui Via, the 5 ways. I can talk about Anselm's ontological arguments. I know all that stuff. It's not convincing to me. I am not going to prove my wife loves me through some logical argument, and I'm not going to prove God exists and change your mind because I can show you, through a syllogism, how this exists. It's a different type of relationship, all right? So I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying it's not for me. I got other things I think about, right? But nonetheless, that's what scientism claims. That springs from materialism. If that's you, You're going to have to understand that's your filter. All right? That's the filter you're bringing to my class. It also just incidentally gives the impression that atheism is like the neutral position. Right? Like all the Christians and religious people disagree, but if you're atheist, you're rational, therefore, we're neutral. So ask us. Atheism, I won't call it a belief. It is absolutely an ideology. It is a worldview. There's no doubt about that. All right? Without getting into an argument between atheism and Christianity or any belief system, it boils down to this. There is something that neither group will ever be able to resolve. Why is there something and not nothing? Christians say it's because God created it, and an atheist is going to say, I don't know. There's no answer to that. There is no answer. Why is there something and not nothing? Stephen Hawking, the guy that's in the wheelchair, he talked about how before the Big Bang, there was this vacuum. I mean, if you read some of his stuff, I don't know what he's thinking. A vacuum is not nothing. Anybody studies, you know what a vacuum is. A vacuum is not nothing. So there wasn't nothing. There was still something. Why is there something and not nothing? I mean, nobody's ever going to be able to answer that. So my view is at some point, the whole conversation goes stale and I get out. All right? All right. 2 more quick ones and then we're done. Or actually, this is it. We live in an information-obsessed world. It's not your fault, it's not my fault. We don't live in the 800s when we didn't have access to libraries and books, right? Today you can Google and Bing or MS, whatever the heck it is, you can search anything. So we have this idea that knowledge is really about collecting the most facts and data. We get confused, and we'll talk about it, get confused between knowledge and data and facts. So you might have certain facts about the Catholic Church, you might have very little knowledge. You might need facts and data to help create knowledge, but they're not the same, all right? So we really have this impression that it's about collecting the most facts and data. So these are incidental things, but they affect us. It gives us the impression that an idea or concept can be determined by like polls, right? So if I want to know something about you, I could poll you and get data and information, and then I might think I know you. No, it doesn't work like that. It's just data about you. It's just facts about you. It's not knowledge about you. That's a different thing. So data isn't, we're not always determined by, concepts aren't determined by polls and by data. I don't want to make a big thing out about this because it would take me longer to kind of make it sound probably palatable to you. And as a matter of fact, if you put that we believe information could become a right, I'll leave it there. Now, we have a right to certain information and data in our public officials because of our government. But we're become obsessed that we think we should know things about people. And reality TV really has played into that. You guys are in the unfortunate age bracket where you grew up with it. There's nothing you can do about it. But it's really colored the world and the way you think about stuff. And we don't realize that, I mean, you guys know mentally, you know that the reality TV, there's nothing real about it. It is all acting. We had a guy here, he was a producer for a couple of the episodes of Undercover Boss. He did an assembly for us about 5 years ago. I've only seen 2 episodes. It happened to be the one that he was a producer of, if I remember right. The one on waste management. There was a scene that kind of moved me. The garbage truck would pull up to this one house to get, they'd come out to get the garbage, and there was a girl with Down syndrome that would come out to greet them. And they'd go over and they were very tender and kind to her, and they were making it look like this is sometimes why they're late and this is why they do it. He said, it's all acting. He said, you know how many takes we did on all this stuff? Do it again, let's go up to that house. I mean, but we're looking at this, even though we know this isn't real, we let it get into our systems thinking it's real, right? We have to watch that, and I'll talk to you as we go through. Things like music and humor and movies, they can bypass our rationality. And they can get to us. And how you know this is, sometimes you could be singing a song and not realizing what the lyrics are, and then once you read the lyrics or see the lyrics, you're like, whoa. probably shouldn't have been saying that. It bypasses like what we call the gate, right? So we have to watch that. Here's something that we could talk about in terms of fake news. Without any real way to compare or to determine the context, we don't know if our information is full or complete. How do we know if our information is full or complete? I mean, if we're going to value and judge people by data and facts, how do we know we have all the data and the facts? How do we know it's not just partial? Sometimes you learn something about somebody, right? You might not know the struggles they go through. You have an impression about them, and you realize the struggles, all of a sudden your impression changes because of new data. That's because you are evaluating that person on things that don't really tell you much. If I made a list of all my characteristics and handed them to you, do you think you can then say you know me? No, you cannot, right? I'll give you a real easy fake news story in a sense. We just had the floods down in Texas. My son-in-law's daughter, it's my son-in-law's sister, and then lived down there. She was up here while the flood was going on down there and got interviewed by a local newspaper. Now, what exactly she said, I'm not sure. But the newspaper printed that she and her daughter had fled, because of the flood, and they were living with the father in Akron, Pennsylvania. The dad went to another part of Texas, and they're all planning to go back on Wednesday as the flood recedes to help rebuild. This was her vacation. She had a plan for 2 months. I'm sitting there reading this. Now, I knew her. This was coincidentally, I knew her. And I'm thinking, I asked my daughter, I said, what the heck is this? She goes, well, I don't know what she told him. She claims that they just started making things up. Because the news, if they don't make it interesting, they don't make it a little, hyperbole, who's going to read it? So think of the decisions that we are making based on the information that we get, and we never stop to question it. Now, how does this apply to religion? You guys have probably a lot of knowledge and facts on the Catholic Church. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably have little knowledge. How do you know you have all the information? You've made some determinations on who and what the Catholic Church is. Based on what? And it's like that for all of us in a lot of things. In other words, I can study other religions. I know in China how Buddhism is different in China than it is in India. I know how it mixed with Taoism, and I can explain to you how that all happened. Do you think if I met a Buddhist from China, that therefore I can say, here's how I know you? No, it doesn't work like that, right? Here's the other thing. Because we are information obsessed, our reliance on technology creates a dependence and an obsession. We may not admit this, but we think if we get more data and facts, if I can learn more about you, that I know you more. That's not necessarily true. We forget how embodied we are and how relational we are, which is the beauty of marriage. It's the reason why I've been married over 28 years, and there's constantly things, not new information. I don't find out, gee, I didn't know my wife likes pickle chips. That's trivial stuff. There's relational things that get revealed, and you tend to know somebody deeper, all right? And that you have to be very vulnerable for that. Here's the problem. If we are information obsessed, it will hamper your education. I should put learning. That'd be a better word, right? Because it becomes trivial. Thomas Aquinas talked about this as proud knowledge, curiositas. In essence, how many times have you been distracted with trivial things on social media than this? And there's nothing wrong with trivial things on social media. But when we start determining that what I get from Twitter gives me the information I need to form knowledge, now we've got an issue. Now we've got an issue. Like, for instance, I had a friend tell me, and it's true, that millennials it's the comeback for libraries. They're finding that millennials are visiting libraries almost to the extent that the baby boomers are. So that's good news, right? I said, dig into the Pew study. What are they going to the library for? Internet services. Now that's okay, but let's not have the pretense that they're there reading great novels. Okay? So you see, information is not enough. And how do we know we have it all? And how do I know that I have that all? I mean, it's hard, right? It makes us humble. If nothing else, it should make us humble. All right? Information becomes confused with knowledge. Information is not knowledge. Okay? Information is not knowledge. When God basically says, I want you to know who I am, He's not looking for you to gather information. Now, all of this may seem, maybe it doesn't seem on the square for you. Maybe you're thinking, no, I don't really think this. Well, that's probably true. None of us are this shallow. And that's not my point. My point is this is our culture. And this is the forces we're up against. So as I go through this course and teach you things, there's certain aspects of this that are going to play as to how well it's received. And I'm not saying that if now that you're aware of it, you'll change your mind. All I'm saying is these are the biases that we all bring into our culture. This is the water. Our water's cloudy, but we don't know it. All right? Because we've never seen good, clear water. That's it. Any questions?